to Writer. I'm your host, Kat Filer, also known as KJ Filer, and my guest today is Kim Conrey, author of the sci-fi romance series Aries Ascending, and the urban fantasy Nicholas Eternal, which is book one of the Wayward Saviors series. When she's not writing novels, she writes a blog about living with OCD at harmocdkimconrey.com. And listeners, please don't worry about that. The link will be below. You can also find her marching at Atlanta's Dragon Con parade as a box hero Wonder Woman. And she says you would be shocked at what she can do with cardboard. I've seen it. It's very cute, at least one of them. Kim serves as the VP of Operations for Atlanta Writers Club. In addition, she collaborates on a podcast with the Wild Women Who Write, a group of authors who interview other authors and industry professionals with the primary goal of supporting female writers. You can find Kim Conrey everywhere on social media, and please do follow her author pages on Goodreads, BookBub, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, just everywhere. Kim, thank you for being with me today. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited about this. I have been a fan since reading your first book, Stealing Aries, and my super fanhood was cemented with your next in that series, Losing Aries. And I'd like you to talk about these books, but I really would like you to start with Nicholas Eternal, which is your latest offering. And that's been getting rave reviews. And I will want you to hold them up. That is an outstanding cover. And you got an amazing Kirkus review. Kirkus says the diverse cast of characters will impress fans of paranormal fantasy sagas such as Kim Harrison's Hollows series, as the potential for future storylines seems virtually limitless. And I could go on and on, but this is you, and the mic is all yours.
Yes, I was really proud of the Kirkus review. I was driving my daughter home from soccer camp like a month ago, and I got the text because Kirkus will text you when your review comes in. And I got the text, but you have a Kirkus dashboard, and I didn't have my password with me. And so I couldn't look at it just then. I had to wait till I got home. And so I'm driving home and I'm thinking to myself, well, I got this really good Midwest review. And I had heard that, well, a friend of ours, Christopher Swan, who writes these great thriller, he had got a good Kirkus review, and he was so happy when it came in good. And he said though that they're the curmudgeon, the old man curmudgeon of the review, all the reviewers out there. And so I was getting more and more nervous. And when I came home, I told my husband, I said, I just all the way home, I had a white knuckle grip on the steering wheel until I could get home and get to my password. And I just wanted to see the review and get it over with. So if it was good news, I could stare in disbelief, or if it was bad news, I just wanted to read it and be done. I'm not somebody that would put it off. I just want to get it over with. And so it was like I was playing 21, and after the Midwest review, I was holding at 19. And I thought, why didn't I just hold? I had a good hand. I was at 19, and I had to be fool enough to yell out, hit me. And that's what I did when I went for the Kirkus review. I just had to yell out, hit me. I was holding a good hand. You know, it's like it was somewhere in my head. I had to, like, I could have felt good about things if I'd have stayed where I was, but I had to push it just a little bit and let Kirkus review it. Let Kirkus review it, the one that was most likely to tear into me.
Yeah.
But it was a good review, and they said it was courageous and audacious, that I took the character and dealt with some things like alcoholism and homelessness and things like that, which I was really scared that they would have a problem with that. But they didn't. And I felt like it was a good exercise in putting yourself out there. And when you're terrified, most things in life that we're most scared of and we go into with our palms sweating and our heart pounding and nauseous, those are when we grow, not only as writers, but as people.
Yeah.
And those are the most worthwhile things in our lives. And when we look back, the things we're we're most proud of, I
Yeah.
think, at the end of the day. And I was proud of it, not only because it turned out good, because there have been things that I've done that have turned out, not so good, but I was still proud of it because I had the guts to do it,
Yeah.
and I think that's what matters. But yeah, it turned out good. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you expound? I'd like you to tell the audience about the story. And so I can
Oh, for
read
sure.
reviews or I could read the summary, but they'd like to hear it from the author.
For sure. Yeah. Nicholas is a savior in desperate need of saving. He's an immortal. And this was originally based on the time I spent as a children's advocate with CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates. And what they do is when a children is taken into the Department of Family and Children's Services and they're taken into foster care, or maybe they go live with a grandparent, aunt, whoever, the CASA, the children's advocate, is trained. We're very trained to go and speak to the child, the bio parents, the foster home therapist, maybe the teacher if the child is having trouble at school. It's another viewpoint
Hmm.
for family court for the judge, and we write out a report and we give it to the judge, and it just gives them another point of view that's not steeped in legalese. The CASA is not afraid to ask for the moon for the child because we're not steeped in the system. We're highly trained, but we're not steeped in the system. So we'll just say, oh, well, I think you should do this. Wouldn't that be great if the child could have this, And the judge doesn't have to take the CASA's recommendation. We just tell them what we think after visiting everybody. And it was a program that was started by a judge, I believe in Seattle, after he noticed that children were literally getting lost in the system.
Yeah.
So I could go on about that, but it was being involved in that program really changed my life, but it also broke me as well. And Nicholas, he's broken.
Yeah.
And so it's an urban fantasy, but it's also a book for people, for anybody who ever wanted to save everybody
Yeah.
and learned that they couldn't do it and it was killing them because they couldn't do it, and it was hurting them because they couldn't do it. And so it's basically about that, and it's about somebody who's circling the drain, and it's tearing him down. It's killing him. And so when the story opens, he has well, I say he has a set of holy daggers, and he can find children who are missing or abducted, and those were all powers that I wished I'd had, these powers to save children back when I was a children's advocate. And all things that I wish I could have done. But he has all that, but despite that, he doesn't always make it in time to save them. And so when the story opens, he's ready to get out of his loop of existence, and he meets a woman with a sacred tattoo who runs a homeless shelter in downtown Atlanta. And so when he meets her, he finds out she has powers as well, and some that might actually either be able to save him or end him. And so that's basically the premise of the story. So it's an urban fantasy, but it's a lot more than that too.
It certainly is. And the cast of characters is amazing. Just individually, they're amazing. But when they interact with each other, they're just, well, it's so cliche, but more than the sum of their parts. They're just amazing. And also, as people are reading this, they're going to start going, oh, that's who? And because there's some sort of mythology they will recognize, and yet it's not really based on that. Well, it is, but it's more of a, I don't know when to spoil it. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. There's an ancient disciple who's still alive, John the Beloved. He's 2,000 years old. And so if anybody's familiar with that story, they'll recognize him. So yeah, he's still alive, and he's working as a lieutenant in the Atlanta PD.
And I think it's great too. They're regular average people on the surface, and then they're behind the scenes, and it's such a tradition too. When I started looking at this, the first thing that popped into my mind, because you were kind enough to let me beta read, was DC and Marvel and some of those characters and why those came about. And now I don't want to say that on the one hand, because your characters are way deeper, way more involved, they're in the relationships and stuff too, really bring everybody out. So, but it was kind of outside the box even for urban fantasy, and I just really found it very, very interesting and from the heart. So yeah,
Thank you.
I think people are going to really love that. And readers are already asking for more. Questions that I already have ahead of your visit are, is there a book, and I'm quoting, is there a book 3, 4, 24 in this series? There's so much more to this tale. I'm hungry for more. Are you working on book 2? Please, please say yes. So what can you tell us about that?
Oh yes, yes. I'm about a third of the way done with the second book in the Wayward Saviors series. Yeah, it's called Nori and the Eternal Light.
Okay. And there's nothing you can tell us?
Well, it's gonna be a lot more Nori centric,
Okay. Okay.
and we're gonna hear a lot more from Damascus
Okay.
and Father Roy, who
Oh, good.
is,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Okay.
the priest that came back from
Yeah.
purgatory, the warrior priest. I've always loved a good warrior priest.
Yes.
Anytime I see that, a priest that's so much more than he seems, I'm in,
Yeah.
because he defies the
Abs
usual.
yeah, absolutely. No, it's very different. It's not something that I haven't read anything like this before. So so readers will be thrilled to know that you make frequent public appearances. So you go around and do book signings, you do guest appearances, you do workshops, which is interesting to anybody who listens who has aspirations of becoming a writer themselves or an author. I would really recommend that you look Kim up and start with the Atlanta Writers Conference, but there's so many other things. So yeah, I'm hoping that they're going to look for you there. Also, I wanted to say, go back to Stealing Aries and Losing Aries. One reviewer called them sci-fi romance in space, and in fact, you won the Georgia Author of the Year for Romance, which is no surprise. The series speaks to, again, like your urban fantasy, it's so much bigger than the genre. And I would like to know how that came about and what's next.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Stealing Aries. I wrote that in 2016, and I put it away. And this is a testament to anybody who has ever had a book that you got discouraged with. Y'all listen to me, okay? That you ever got so discouraged with that you put it in a drawer to forget about it. Don't.
Yeah.
Because this is the one that ended up getting this Georgia Author of the Year for Romance seal, and this is the book, you guys, that I put in a drawer
Yeah.
because I got discouraged. So, I mean, that's a testament to, sometimes we get in our head
Yeah.
too much, and we get discouraged, and we let things sort of bog us down sometimes. What had happened was I originally started out with a pandemic that stranded the colonists on Mars. And so I wrote it in 2016 when there was no COVID.
Yeah.
And so, but when I started querying, COVID I had queried some before that, but then when I was really in the thick of querying, COVID started.
Yeah.
And agents and editors at publishing houses were saying, no pandemic stories, because they were getting all these pandemic stories, fiction, nonfiction, all of it. They were like, no, they didn't want to hear anything about it. And it was an automatic reject in their eyes. They were like, no. And so I thought, well, I had woven a pandemic story all through Stealing Aries. That was what stranded the colonists on Mars, because the pandemic swept the Earth, and then the Earth was so busy trying to just take care of themselves that they left the people on Mars to fend for themselves. They just kind of abandoned them. And so I shoved it in a drawer, and I thought, I just can't. I've woven this pandemic through that story so tightly that to pick it back out, I'm just going to have to just shred this thing. And I just can't. I just felt exhausted about that. So I shoved it in a drawer. Well, we were recording a podcast with the Wild Women, and my friend Kathy said, let's record an episode as our characters. And at the time, I was working on an OCD memoir with my oldest child. And I said, well, if we're answering questions as our character, I don't want to answer as myself. I'm already me. That's going to be boring. So I thought, well, I'll answer as Harlow Hansen from Stealing Aries. And when I started answering, it was like an exercise to get to know your character better and to just be inside their skin as you answer these questions. And as I started answering questions as Harlow Hansen from Stealing Aries, I thought, I miss her.
Yeah.
I miss this character. She's interesting.
Yeah.
And I've shoved her in a drawer. This is terrible. And so I got it back out and I thought, Kim, you've been writing, writing for really all my life, but seriously writing and querying and getting rejection letters and dealing with that for over a decade. Yeah. And you let this little thing beat you, this pandemic thing that you've got to tear out there, thread something else through that story to strand them people on Mars. Come on, you can do that. My word. And this was like the 6th book I had written, the 5th or 6th book I had written. And I let that little thing beat me. Come on. So that's when the caldera blew. And I decided that the thing that would strand them there was I had also had a interest in Yellowstone National Park, because a lot of times when you tell people that Yellowstone National Park is sitting on top of a caldera, honestly, I've had people say, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's why the geysers go up like Old Faithful. And because there's pressure under there, and the steam has to, when it escapes, it's because it's sitting on a big old caldera. Sometimes they'll look at you like, yeah. And if that ever really went up, like really blew, ash could just circle the earth. That is bad news.
Yeah.
So that was my new tragedy that stranded them on Mars, and it worked. And it really didn't take that long to thread that through and just find and replace pandemic in the Word doc, So that's just my word to people. Like, don't give up on a story that your heart is in.
Exactly. And it was also timely. It tied into climate change. And then you pulled the British royal family into that. So you put...
Right when that started cooking.
Right,
and
exactly.
It wasn't intentional either.
It was like the news was following Kim.
Kind of was.
Yeah. So that was interesting. So you mentioned, oh, no, wait, I want you to set the stage on at least the first book to kind of tell. So this is also about neurodivergence. Your character is now neurodivergent.
Yes. Harlow Hansen has a speech and language disorder. It's called mixed expressive receptive speech and language disorder. And I have someone in my family who's very close to me who has mixed expressive receptive speech and language disorder, or MERLD. Okay. And this person also has an apraxia of speech diagnosis, but the MERLD came to be a bigger issue. But it can really affect your life. Really forever, even as you get older and your brain finds ways over, under, and through and around, the speech disorder, it can affect how you see the world, how you see yourself for the rest of your life. And one of the bigger problems, and what I would want people to know, and that's why I gave Harlow Hansen this speech and language disorder, is because a lot of times when people have these kinds of speech and language disorders, you don't know they have it.
Right.
Because I've told people before, well, my family member, they don't understand you.
Right.
When they were little, and they would say, they sound just fine. I'm sure they understand me. And I would say, They don't. This is something that goes on in the brain. And a lot of people who aren't familiar with this think, oh, well, a speech disorder is like if you say wabbit instead of rabbit, like you mispronounce your R's or whatever. And it certainly can be that, but just because you don't hear it doesn't mean it's there, because that's where the speech and language part comes in. It means it's in the brain, with how the brain processes the language as it comes in to the brain. So the expressive receptive, when it comes in, it takes their brain longer to process what you're saying. And sometimes these kids, when they're in the classroom, the teacher may think, oh, they're daydreaming, or they're not paying attention when I'm speaking to them. Or other adults who are out, and they say, oh, well, what's your name or whatever. They may think that the kid is just purposely not answering them, or, just being willful or whatever, when their brain is just racing to catch up.
Yeah.
And it's just a processing disorder. And I wish more people knew that, because when you think we just figured this out just in the last few decades, can you imagine throughout the ages, the children who have been screamed at when their poor brains were just trying to catch up? And people have yelled at children, answer me, when the child is trying to answer them. So that's why I wrote Harlow as having that speech and language disorder, and how, even though she's an adult in this book, and her brain has found a way around it, and she speaks clearly now, when she gets really stressed or really upset, sometimes she has a problem with it. And Rhonda Rousey has apraxia of speech. And I remember a speech and language pathologist telling me, sometimes if you'll watch her in interviews, you can see, like, she'll slow down sometimes when she's talking. And a mom approached her one time at a signing. Ronda Rousey is, actually, for people that don't know, she's a professional wrestler, female wrestler. A mom approached her at a signing with a apraxia of speech pamphlet and said, would you tell your fans that this is something that you had? Because she briefly talked about it in her autobiography, but didn't, call it apraxia of speech. And she said, oh, I will. And the mom thought, oh, I don't know that she will. And then later that day, she put it, I think it was on Facebook, took a picture of the pamphlet and put it on Facebook. So I thought that was cool.
It is. And we've been talking as a culture about seeing people or people being invisible in society. And I just had a friend on, an author who is paraplegic, and I was his publicist for a while, and one of the most amazing signings I've ever been at was there were people lined up, and neither one of us expected that, because he was a mid-list author. We did not think that that's the way that was going to go. I was scrambling for how are we going to line them up? And there was one where there were several people. It turned out that an awful lot of people that were there because the protagonist was, Kevin is quad, and the protagonist was paraplegic. And they were there because it was the first time they'd ever read a book that there was a disabled character in it. And this one guy, everyone was crying. He had gotten his book off the shelf by himself with his feet. He had no arms. And he brought that book up to Kevin, and he put it up on the table, and he pulled open to where he wanted it signed. And before Kevin could even sign it, he says whatever his name was, and he said, and it's about damn time I was in a book.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So I thought it was really, I love to see authors doing this. Cultural appropriation is being talked about, or cultural inclusion in books, but also, I think it was Tanya Todd who talked about we're not all the same, and that's what makes us interesting. And so many times we write characters in the book that can do everything, and there's nothing different about them. And when they are different, it's a gift to the reader, because somebody's going to see themselves as able. This person is a superhero. So yeah, I thought that was really good. Yeah. So you and your husband George are both authors. and wildly successful, and you appear together a lot in public, which is really great. And I'm hoping George will come back and be a guest when he's got time, because he just has a new book coming out, Offlining, a pre-apocalyptic sci-fi comedy. I just started reading it. It's so irreverent and witty. It's just a delicious book. I love it. And if you were to read his other works, you wouldn't necessarily expect this of him.
You would not, no.
So wonderful. So I'd like to see that. But my question to you is, what is it like to be under the same roof? And I ask him the same question, to be married to another wildly successful author. How does this work out?
Well, it's really good on the one hand, because in our office where we sit, my desk is faces one way, and then he's sort of behind me and to the side a little, so I can just swivel around and say, hey, if you're not too busy, can I run this sentence by you, or does this sound weird, and ask him stuff like that. So that's really great. And that works out well, because I feel like I always have a sounding board. The downside is that we were in a critique group together since, I would say, about 2009.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so you get really used to, anybody that's been in a critique group,
Yeah.
a fairly honest critique group for a long time, you eventually get used to people being really real with you and telling you what needs to be fixed. And you walk into the critique group, you read your work, or you send it to each other, however you do it. And you get down to business, tell each other what needs to be fixed, and you develop, a pretty tough skin. I almost hesitate to say tough skin, because I think sometimes that's maybe misused. But you just get used to it. But then when we got married, the dynamic does change a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because you do want that person to behave a little bit different. Like, you want them to tell you what they like first, but we automatically go into critique mode, and we start in with, okay, so I don't know who's talking here, and this line here didn't really make sense to me. It's like, we're not being mean to each other, but we just do what we do in critique group. Now this was good, but this over here, blah blah, So it's not that we don't say things that we like, because we do, but we're just official. We're just all business. Yeah. And I've stopped him before and I said, okay, I'm going to need you to just slow down and find something that you like with it. Okay.
Yes. Sandwich that.
Yes. Sandwich method. Oreo. Come on. So yeah, that the dynamic did change. It did, because it's your spouse now, and you expect them to, be a little kind.
Well, and I wondered, because then there's the other dynamic, which I deal with, where my spouse doesn't really read fiction. He started to recently. He used to. And then you go to college and you don't have time. And then when you come out, you're reading things for work, and depending on what you do, sometimes it's hard to get back. But he's starting to now. Doesn't read the same thing I do, but I would try to bounce things off of him, and he would just go, that's great. Which is not helpful.
So you're like, more please.
Yeah.
Come on. I know it's in there.
So yeah, it's sort of one thing or the other. So passion projects. You also write a blog on harm OCD, entitled You Are Not Alone.
Yes.
And I encourage everyone to read this blog, because whether you're dealing with this or not, insight is a gift. And I recognized one of my own family members might possibly be dealing with some form of that. And so that's not something that you can just tell someone, you think, and so, well, maybe you can, but I couldn't, and not in this situation. And so I just pointed it out to him as something that I thought was interesting, and he read it. He reads it religiously. He knew exactly what I was talking about. It turns out that he recognized himself, and I want you to know that he has asked me to thank you because he
Oh my
does
gosh.
not, he's not alone.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
that's everything. I mean, that just means everything. Because when we were in the thick of that, with my oldest child, and when I was in the thick of it, just the thought that one day it could help someone else or mean something to somebody,
Yeah.
that's just everything because it was so painful,
Yeah.
and I think some people, you'll have someone who likes things tidy or they like to keep their sock drawer organized, and they'll have the little friend that giggles and goes, "Oh, you're so OCD." And
Mm,
it's funny to them, it's funny. And I try to be patient with that because I know that they don't understand. If somebody doesn't have someone in their family who has severe OCD, they don't really know what it is.
yeah.
They do think it's somebody that just likes things really neat and tidy and cute and clean, And so they'll throw the phrase around, "You're so OCD," and they think it's funny. But when you have a
Yeah.
child that's dry heaving over a toilet because they have looping images
Yeah.
of violence, or that, maybe they saw a movie where someone was murdered and they're begging you to tell them, "How do you know I'm not a murderer, Mom? What if I'm a murderer? How can I possibly know that I'm not a murderer? Well, what if I am? But how do you know? Promise me I'm not.
Cool.
How do you know? How can you promise me? How can you possibly know I'm not? If I have this thought that's looping in my head, well, I might be. How do you know I'm not? How do you
Yeah.
know?" And so if they have the OCD brain and they're already prone to ritualizing, well, they might be touching a lamp when they remembered in the movie somebody stabbing somebody. So they might go back and touch the lamp and try to have a thought that's a good thought, like
Yeah.
about a stuffed rabbit, or I don't know, anything. Could be anything soft or kind or loving. But then they might get halfway across the living room and think about the stabbing again. So they run back to the lamp and touch the lamp they were touching when they had the stabbing thought, and think a good thought again.
Yeah.
None of this is logical, but they might go back and forth across the living room, back to the lamp, trying to touch the lamp again. And I've had these kind of rituals too. Now that I'm older, for whatever reason, my brain is cooled. I almost describe it as a cooling down, because it's
Okay.
almost like when I had really bad OCD flares, right around, I guess, around puberty, they were
Yeah.
really bad. And then after my first child was born, it just raged up again really bad. Maybe the stress level or the hormones
Hmm.
made it really bad again. But it's cooled now to almost a whisper, I guess you would say. But when I get stressed out or I'm really tired, it can get bad again. But if people who kind of threw that around and giggled and said, "Oh, you're so OCD," could just be with someone who's in the middle of a really bad OCD attack
Yeah.
and see them like throwing up, dry heaving, and,
Yeah.
and saying, "I don't think I should be allowed to live if I'm having these thoughts."
Gosh, that's scary.
Oh,
Yeah,
it
that's really scary.
it's something else. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think OCD International, they do some great work and they have a lot of resources there. In fact, that's where we found my oldest child's therapist, who has just worked wonders. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how it is for you, but writing is often therapeutic when you're dealing with a situation like that, writing directly about it, or writing sort of side eye, like it's over there. It's not right in your face, but it's right there and it's in my book and I'm gonna sort of introduce it. I had talked to another author that you know, Tara Allred, had talked about the power of story. And I think an awful lot of authors are doing that, where what they're really doing is having a conversation with people, where you can talk about something with somebody, and if it's a story, there's no argument to be had. It's a story, and yet you're kind of getting something across. So I think that was very brave, and I see other areas in your books where you're dealing with situations where you're actually talking to somebody about something that they might not have actually considered from that point of view. So it's entertaining. It's definitely entertaining, but it's also educational. So there's
I
that.
hope so.
Also think it's quite selfless of you to do that. And then you talked about doing the memoir with your daughter, and it's called You're Not a Murderer, You Just Have OCD. And you won Best Pitch at the 2022 Atlanta Writers Conference for that. Are you doing more with it? I mean, where is that?
Yeah, it had been bouncing around a couple of publishing houses for a while. And now I'm considering maybe just self-publishing that one. I don't know. Trying to figure out what I want to do with it. Yeah.
Okay, well, keep us posted on that.
Well,
So, Kim, is there a question I have not asked that you would like me to ask?
let's see. Well, I do have a brand new website.
Oh, and it is a beauty. Oh my, it's the envy of a lot of websites. Oh,
Yes,
it's
it's at
just fun.
kimconrey.com.
Yeah, and listeners, just go play on her website. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
It's like almost like a little. I find it has the same appeal as a game. So you have things to discover. It's got like, I don't know. It's not Easter eggs, but it feels that way. So yeah. Anyway, it's really good.
Thank you. And also, Brimstone, we're July 25th. My husband and I are having a launch party for my book, Nicholas Eternal, and his book, Offlining, his pre-apocalyptic sci-fi. I
So
love that
good.
term,
Yeah.
pre-apocalyptic, at Brimstone Tavern in Alpharetta, Georgia. So if you're in the area, come by. And let's see, I need to put that on my website for sure. Okay, I'll do that. I'll update my calendar. Go to kimconrey.com and I will put that date on my website. But
Okay.
yeah, it's July 25th at Brimstone Tavern. I believe it starts at 7 on Old Alabama Road in Alpharetta.
Okay. And then do you have an events page on your website? I don't know if I saw one.
Do
You do.
I
Okay,
do.
good. So
I need
people
to
can
update.
keep up with you there. So yeah. All right. Well, Kim, it has been an honor and a pleasure. I really appreciate you making the time. I hope to have you back for another episode for future works and passion projects. And listeners, as always, I will post the links below so you can find Kim Conrey's books. You can find out where to meet her in person, where to find her online, and also stay abreast of her latest adventures. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much.